Well, as Britain steps up its rhetoric over Gibraltar today, many will be asking whether or not the rock will soon find itself under Spanish sovereignty. And if it does, will it be a major loss to the UK or be one less territory for us to fight over? Well, here with me to discuss this is Dr. Alistair Pinkerton, an expert on geopolitics from the Royal Holloway University. Alistair, thanks very much indeed for coming in. First of all, was this always brewing? Was it always going to come to some kind of a head, this argument?
Yeah, it'd be fair to say that the issue of Gibraltar has been a stone in the Spain of Britain's shoe for, well, 300 years, but more particularly since about the 1950s, and certainly since General Franco came to power. This rather like the Falklands in the context of Argentina, this has been a long-running irritant dispute that has affected the relations between the two countries, and it's no coincidence that the dictator that was Franco was particularly animated on this point. It was one of those nationalistic talismans that could get invoked by that government.
I mean, that's the obvious parallel with the Falklands, isn't it? That when things are a bit rocky at home, to excuse the pun, you know, you can draw attention to a foreign policy issue like this.
Yeah.
But do the parallels bear up? Is Falklands as important to us as Gibraltar or vice versa?
The parallels are incredibly strong. I mean, effectively, the news we see today is that Spain and Argentina are potentially kind of going to go into a geopolitical double act on this point. They're going to make joint representations to the UN. So there are definitely parallels in terms of the players and the actors and the approaches that might get taken. Strategically, of course, Gibraltar no longer has the same kind of resonance that it once did, the gateway to the Mediterranean, which used to serve a British empire through Aden, the Suez Canal, and India. The Falklands, on the other hand, does, of course, have a strategic importance. It's the gateway to the British Antarctic territories, if nothing else. There's also the prospect of oil there. But ultimately, neither of those scenarios really are terribly important, because after all, Britain has said what the primary factor that they take into account here is the rights and wishes of the inhabitants of both the Falkland Islands and Gibraltar.
Now, they can both Spain and Britain are dragging up UN resolutions going back to the beginning of the 20th century to argue that their claim is the correct one, and that if it was to go to the European Court of Justice, that both are likely to triumph. It does seem that Britain's slightly stronger case if it does go to the ECJ, but does that matter?
I suspect probably not. I mean, Britain would have to abide by any European Court of Justice ruling, of course. But what Britain says is that what we have to give primacy to here are the rights and wishes of the inhabitants. And of course, Spain contests that. The Treaty of Utrecht, and we're celebrating, of course, the 300th anniversary of that. That timing is, not coincidental with the way that these things are being brought back up. The Treaty of Utrecht doesn't take into account the rights and wishes of a native population. The Treaty of Utrecht was written to take account of a military fortress 300 years ago. And so the law is very, very difficult in this area. We can't, of course, the Treaty of Utrecht has effectively been superseded by the EU treaty, amongst other things.
You get this kind of build-up of rhetoric, don't you, when things like this get raised? And
Yeah.
Everyone making such a lot about these warships leaving Portsmouth on an exercise that was scheduled for beginning of June onwards. Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, having a few tart words to say as far as the Spanish are concerned. Is this all just contributing to keep us away from anything turning really bad?
Well, I mean, there's an inevitable ratcheting up of tensions. First of all, it was a few blocks of concrete in the sea. Then it was a jet skier transgressing, apparently, the Spanish border. Then it was the border controls. Now we have this war of words. In a sense, this is nothing unusual. This kind of thing happens periodically. It just so happens that the timing of this and the 300th anniversary of the Treaty of Utrecht. We also have Argentina, which is rotating onto the Security Council of the UN, and the seemingly unholy alliance of an EU member and somebody like Christina de Kirchner in Argentina coming together. All of these things come together at this moment to lead to incredible
and the other
tensions.
danger, I suppose, as well, Alistair, is that you can fall out with someone like Argentina and send your task force down there if you really have to, and that may serve your own purposes, whoever you're the Prime Minister at the time. You can't fall out like that with Spain. It's just not feasible.
No. And Britain has clearly no interest in falling out with Spain at all. I mean, David Cameron's intervention the other day on the phone was a small act of diplomacy, and that seems to have now fallen by the wayside in this ever more escalating war of words. There is not going to be a fundamental rift with Spain, I don't believe. People can still go to Malaga on holiday. That's not
And they will.
and they will. But for the people of Gibraltar, there might be increasing inconvenience as Spain continues to exert what it can do, which is basically an inconvenience strategy on that border region.
So briefly then, it's a long hot summer and then tempers cool as we go into autumn and it all dies down. Is that the most likely
I suspect that's exactly what will happen, but you never know. We might very well find a member of the royal family taking a visit to Gibraltar anytime soon.
Well, I'm sure
Royalty and loyalty go together in that context.
I'm sure that would help in some way. Alistair Pinkerton, thanks very much indeed for joining us
Thank you very
Sky
much.
News tonight.